Welcome to Bilingual Book Buddies podcast and webcast. Bilingual Book Buddies is dedicated to promoting bilingual books for children and sharing insights from authors, illustrators, editors, agents, and anyone involved in bringing these stories to life. And I'm Claudia Sloan. I'm one of three co-hosts of Bilingual Book Buddies. I'm an artist who also writes and illustrates books for children. I focus on topics of holistic wellness, Latinx culture, my own life adventures, modern fairy tales, sports, and STEAM, among others. In fact, my latest picture book is a sports book, bilingual, and it's a dream come true for me because it was a collaboration with my favorite professional basketball teams, the Phoenix Suns and the Phoenix Mercury. And now I have a pleasure to bring and introduce to you my co-hosts, Silvia Lopez and Alicia Salazar, in that order.
Hello, I'm Silvia Lopez. I'm a Cuban-American author living in Miami, Florida. I finished a career as a school librarian, and that love of books brought me to my next career as an author of children's books. I have about 20 books published. Most of them are bilingual or dual language. Some are biographies, some are retellings of tales, and some are just fiction. So it is a pleasure to be here with my co-hosts and with Nicholas Solis today.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alicia Salazar, children's book author and former teacher. I've written bilingual and English language books for young readers, including the Camilla the Star series, Trolls, Loch Ness Monster, and my recently published picture book, Cascarones, An Easter Surprise. I'm passionate about stories that celebrate culture, spark imagination, and encourage kids to express themselves, especially in more than one language. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest. Nicholas Solis was a pretty shy kid. It took him a long time to find his voice. Now he writes books hoping to inspire others to find theirs. His book, The Littlest Grito, The Color Collector, and My Town, Mi Pueblo promote kindness, acceptance, and courage. Nicholas lives in Austin, Texas with his wife, 2 sons, and their dog named Charlie. He loves writing, teaching, and spending time with the family.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here again.
We're so glad to have you.
Welcome, Nicholas. Really happy to have you. And I happen to have the first question. So
Okay.
you mentioned that you were a shy kid and that it took you a long time to find your voice. How did writing help you overcome that? And how does that influence the books you write today?
So growing up, my parents got divorced quite a bit, and that meant I started new schools. And by going to new schools, that meant usually didn't have a lot of friends. And so I was moving around constantly, going to even whether we moved to different houses or even back and forth between houses. So it meant that I was alone a lot. And what I found was that I kind of turned to books and I kind of turned to writing to help me with that. And so, I remember at 8 years old, I was writing stories and reading and making poems and stuff like that. So I was starting very, very early because it was a nice, easy thing to do in your room. And you have to remember back then we didn't have internet. There's only 4 channels on the TV. So you spent your time filling your brain with imagination, and that's kind of how I did it. So, and it was also a great way to kind of escape, life at home. So it wasn't always the easiest or the greatest. I had a kind of grumpy stepfather, and so you just kind of stayed out of his way. And one of the ways to do that was reading or writing. And so that's why it kind of helped me not find my voice at first, but kind of stay secure and stay safe and feel secure. And then from that, by expressing myself and expressing my stories as time went on, I was able to come out of my shell a little bit more. And so that's kind of the beginning of where it all started.
Thank you for that. And yes, books can take us to adventures we never even think about until we get into the book. That's fascinating that you discovered that as a young kid. But I do have the next question too, and this is about your latest picture book, The Littlest Grito. And this book is all about finding one's voice, as you did. So can you share the inspiration behind this story and why it was important for you to write it?
So the Littlest Grito they talk to writers and they always say, like, write what you know, and especially write from your experiences, especially as a Hispanic author. There hasn't been a lot of stories out there for people like me and stuff. And so I wanted to be able to write stories kind of from my childhood. Um, so what I would do is I'd usually basically start thinking, okay, what are some stories from my childhood? What are some ways that I grew up? And that went with like my town, mi pueblo, and where that came from. But the Littlest Grito, I remember growing up and hearing the grito all the time. And people would shout it in music, or we'd go to fiestas. I'd go to, like, my mom loves to dance, and so she'd take me fiestas. We'd go dancing, and somebody would shout the grito. Or we go to every week we'd go to church, and after church we'd go to a Mexican restaurant, East Austin, and there'd be mariachi bands, and they'd be shouting the grito. And so I was like, oh, I should write a story about a grito, because the grito wasn't that huge a thing when I started writing this story. It was really interesting when the movie Coco came out, and there's three distinct parts in the movie where he's shouting a grito or learning to shout the grito. And I felt so seen with that movie. Like, it was the first time I was like, I mean, even the mom, the grandma, his grandma looked like my grandma, like not his great grandma, but like the grandma who like throws the chancla and all this. I was like, that reminds me of grandma. Like, it was just this very inspirational like movie, and I was like, oh, that's a grito. And so even when I do like when I do school visits now, I'll ask kids, I'll go, does anybody know what a grito is? And maybe, like, especially in Texas, like three or four. Sometimes it'll be half the group, but a lot of times it's not. And then I'll go, okay, let me show you a clip, and I'll show them gritos that I've found throughout like Disney movies. There's been little tiny clips, and then I'll show Coco, and they'll go, oh, Coco, and they'll raise their hand, and so they know what a grito is. They just never taken that in. And so I thought about these stories. I was like, I want to write a story about a grito. And so then I was like, what would that look like, and how would that go? And I had this feeling before I had my two sons that I thought I was going to have a girl. And I was like, well, if I have a girl, I want this story to be for her. I want about finding a voice, finding her voice, and not being like just told what to believe and told how to talk. As a teacher, I think we sometimes expect, oh, well, the girls are the quietest ones. The boys are just boys and they're loud and stuff. And I don't like that. I wanted to be like, if you're in my class, I don't care if you're a boy or girl, find your voice, speak up, stand up for yourself. And so that's kind of what I wanted with this book. So I found this character that she wasn't so sure about herself, and she has to find her voice. And at the end, she does find that voice, and she lets it out through that grito. And so that's kind of where the inspiration came. And then as I was doing the research for the book, I discovered that the grito basically started in Mexico. So it was this shout, Father Miguel Hidalgo, now I'm brain farting, I'm sorry. But basically, he went up to the top of his church, he rang the bell, he got everybody together in his town. He said, Spain should not treat us like this. We don't want to be New Spain anymore. We need to be Mexico. And then he gave this rousing speech, and he let out the grito. And that was the beginning, the first time we'd ever heard the grito in history, recorded history. And that began the Mexican War for independence. And so it was really interesting to kind of go down this path that I had never kind of known about, because we just grew up shouting the grito and doing the grito. We just never knew it started a whole country. And so that's kind of the story of where this came.
That's fascinating, because when I was a kid, I remember we used to go to the plazas. That lived in different cities, but we would always go to the plazas to celebrate El Grito de Independencia, which is, the grito of independence. Yes, it has a fascinating story behind it. Thank you for bringing it to the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicolas. And I have the pleasure of asking you the next question. But before I do, in Cuba, we have un grito also. It's called El Grito de Baile. And in that grito, it was also the call for independence from Spain. So I guess if you look around the Hispanic countries or the countries in South America and the Caribbean, you're going to find gritos. So to me, this was a learning experience with the Mexican grito, because I totally relate.
Okay, I have somos gritones.
We are very gritones people. We can't help it, right? That's right. Okay, so here we go. Nicolas, you have talked about struggling because you didn't always feel that you were fully bilingual. And so you were struggling with identity with that, even though your family is bilingual. And as you have just said, you've had all these experiences. But not feeling fully bilingual, how has that shaped your perspective as a children's book author?
It's interesting because I think I struggle with it because I think I have this feeling of like you're never Mexican enough because you don't speak Spanish. I'm not white enough because I don't look completely white. Like I'm a mix. I have German, I have Mexican. So I have this mix in me. And so it's always been interesting about feeling like where I fit in. You know, my whole family's from the Valley, from Brownsville, so they all speak Spanish. And when I was growing up, they didn't speak Spanish to me a lot. Like, and to be fair, I didn't take it in that much either. I was like, you know, I was just a English kid watching English cartoons, and that's kind of how I grew up. And as I grew up, I also discovered that, you know, my grandma used to get hit. You know, my dad used to get his knuckles smacked. If you speak Spanish in school, it was looked down upon. And so when you came to Austin, or when they moved to Austin, it was like, it's not going to serve you. It's not going to do well. So we're not going to really push that on you. And so it wasn't pushed on me. And you know, but you know, means and measures, I am a very successful middle class, you know, Anglo person. If you look at it, like as far as you know, we've done very well. I have a great education, all those things. But along that way came this feeling of like a loss of culture, a loss of who I am. You know, I work at a Title I school. A lot of my kids speak Spanish. A lot of my parents speak Spanish. A lot of the staff speak Spanish. You know, I danced ballet folklorico for 13 years with the group. Like I have all these experiences that make me this mix, and yet I never feel like I fully fit in. And so it's weird thinking about it still because at the beginning I struggled. Like if you look at, you know, My Tell Me Pueblo, it's English and it's Spanish. And I was like, well, am I lying? Because I'm not a full Spanish speaker. You know, you look back 20 years ago and you look back on these stories of all these like multicultural books, but that were written by primarily Anglo authors. And like they go in and they bring their voice and they bring, you know, they bring what they believe is the culture. And I think a lot of it came from a good place of saying like, you know, we want to expose these stories, but we'll be the voice for those stories. And as time has gone on, I don't feel like you can truly be a representative of that voice unless you haven't lived it. And so that's the struggle too, because well, then have I lived it? But if you look at My Tell Me Pueblo, like my family grew up in the Valley. I grew up in Austin, but we were always in the Valley. We were always going across the border. We were in Brownsville. We were, you know, I was bargaining in Spanish, like to get, you know, to get the best prices on things when you go to Matamoros and stuff. And so like, you know, I lived that. That's who I am. Um, and so I have to be like, okay, I have to accept the fact that these are stories from my life and they are me. And whether I feel fully one or the other, I need to start accepting the fact that these are my stories and I'm allowed to write them and I need to be proud of them. And I think as I've talked to other people about this, because this is an issue that comes up quite a bit when I talk to different authors and just people in general, I feel like I need to write more stories about this loss of culture, this loss of feeling like you fit, because um, so many people reach out to me, and it's not even just like Spanish. I mean, Mexican and American. I've met German Americans who were like growing up in Fredericksburg, and they were like, we never talked. You know, we grew up only knowing German, and then I don't know German anymore, and I only know. It's very interesting to feel like everyone feels this loss of culture sometimes when we try to assimilate and try to mix. And I think it's okay to hold on to pieces of your old culture, pieces of your new culture, pieces of all these different aspects of you, because they all make us who we are. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in my books. And so that's kind of what I need to write more of too, because I've written a few, but I'm not hitting it perfect yet of really showing that experience of like where do I fit in and how do I fit in? And is it okay not to fit in and just kind of find my own path?
And I'm so glad that you're
Yes.
doing that, writing more about it. I can tell you personally, I connected a lot with My Town, Mi Pueblo. This is a spread that shows the two sides of the border, and that's my experience too as a child. And when I was reading it, I immediately connected with it. It's like that was me right there, and I know I am certain that a lot of children in this country can connect with that as well.
Yeah, and since talking about finding your voice, your books are kind of about talking about finding your voice. And this is your unique voice, and sharing it gives you a connection to so many kids who might have the same experience. There are different types of biculturalism and bilingualism. And you probably have a very unique audience too, as unique as your own voice. So
Well, that's
thank
what I hope.
you.
That's what I'm trying to find.
Well, absolutely. I'm sitting over here in Miami on the other side of other side of the continent. And I'm just really identify with everything that you have said so far, and want to extend it to we not only need to we not only need to write about our own experiences, but we just need to write as a human experience, because there are bridges in other parts of the world where people walk across from one to the other. And if it could be even a boat, that it's a bridge, people crossing from North Africa into Italy or whatever, all of these migrations of people. Um, my own, I mean, I had a migration. I'm an immigrant too. Um, and they all are different, which makes it interesting, and it teaches us the history of other people and other experiences, but we can also internalize them. We can also say, oh, I can identify with that. Not only learn about something different, but oh, and that relates to me a little bit too, even if it doesn't relate as much as you're saying with your German friends, because maybe, they're a little bit more removed. Some German Americans, Italian Americans, it's third generation, fourth generation here, but you still feel it. You're a citizen of the world. And it is so important for children to know that I think the most important thing, besides bringing in the historical value of it, is the acceptance. It's okay. It's fine. We're all different and it's fine. And so I think that's wonderful. I have another question for you. So, in your book, My Town, Mi Pueblo, which I have right here, it was written with input from family, friends, teachers, and librarians. Can you tell us a little bit about the collaborative process, and then why making this particular book so bilingual, one page in English, one page in Spanish, was so important to you?
Well, let me hit that second part of that question first, because I think that's kind of what inspired it to move forward. And it's very interesting now because, when I first wrote it, um, families were coming to the border and then being separated from their parents, put in cages, and that's where that came from. And so, and if you look now, we are uh, we are just now people are just going to anybody in the streets, and if they're brown or a different color, they're saying, "Let me see your papers. Let me see your ID." And it's very interesting. Like I wrote this, 5, 6 years ago when I first wrote it, and we're still having these issues now. And so I wrote this story because I was inspired, saying like, I do not want us to vilify the border. I do not want us to vilify brown kids, especially. I want acceptance and I want love and I want people to, I just was being torn apart, seeing these families just torn apart. Like, and that's simple. And so I wanted a story that said, we have so many things in common. We need to celebrate our similarities. And if there's differences are good. Let's respect those
They're good.
differences. And so that's why I wrote that story. And so when you read the story, I wanted it to be bilingual because I wanted not only English kids to be able to read it, but I also wanted Spanish kids to be able to read it. I also wanted kids that I wanted it to be as open to audience as possible, especially my own students. And when I go to a lot of these school and author visits, I ask who speaks English. A lot of them, who speaks Spanish, who speaks both. And so that book becomes more open to every single person, and that's what I wanted. I wanted a book that was going to connect. And if you look at the story, it's English on one side, it's Spanish on the other. The gutter of the book is technically the metaphorical border of the United States and Mexico. And you're going to the cousins go across, and basically they're crossing over and they're saying the exact same thing. Oh, I love the food. I love the food, but one's in English and one's Spanish. I love the culture and I love finding something different. I love the culture and I like finding something different. But you're putting them in different settings, and yet they're saying the same thing. And so what you come to realize is that they have so much in common, and it's all this about this love and this exposure to other cultures that I really want people to kind of dive into with My Town, Mi Pueblo. And so when I was writing this, I knew I wanted it in English and I knew I wanted Spanish. And then I was like, ugh, my Spanish is not good enough for this. And so I worked on it a lot by myself. And then I went to a lot of different people. And some of the people that made it in the book were, I went to my librarian who was bilingual. I went to my grade level leader, Angel, who's bilingual. And he's from Puerto Rico. And our librarian was from Mexico. And then I went to a really close friend of mine, Miss Peña, who's in the office, and she is, from Mexico as well. And so they three helped, and I dedicated the book for their help in there because they were the first ones to kind of to help me try to translate or fix any of the mistakes that I had made, or just completely be like, this whole page doesn't make sense. We'll help you and fix that. And then I also went to my dad, and it was actually interesting when I was working with everybody. And I also went to a critique group, a Facebook critique group that was amazing, of Latinx writers, and they had input and they helped me with a few things. But like the page that I think is the most impactful is when they're trying to cross the border and you see all the guards and you see like there's like all this love through the whole book, and then it's like bam, you still got to go by these guys with guns, and you still got to go by these people with dogs and chain link fences. But the fence, the word fence is so hard to say, like, or gate. So it was very like, border Spanish is different from interior Spanish, is different from Puerto Rican Spanish. So we were having a lot of issues with that. And so it was also showing like how language and how everybody thinks, oh, you're a Latin culture, but Latin cultures are so diverse and so amazing. And so it's very interesting to be like, it was a real collaboration. So finally we just had to pull the trigger and pick one of the words to go with. But that's how that kind of whole thing came together.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And how did so you had input, you just answered that. You had family that helped you, your dad, friends, teachers, and librarians, so that you answered the question backwards, but you still answered it. So that's fine. I love that particular spread in the book. It is so touching and so impactful, even beyond children. Just a grown-up looking at that is very, it's touching, very, very hard to watch something like that. Okay, I'm going to pass it over. No, I have another question. Sorry. Yes, that's the one. Yes, I have one more question.
I'm really proud of that slide, because I think we're so used to like picture books having, happy endings. And this was almost a flip. This was almost like everything's happy, everything's great. And then it's like,
yes,
boom. Like I wanted it to be, and for Nancy Paulson to be like, yeah, let's do it. And this softened it up. I actually had a little bit harsher, I had a little bit scarier, but she was like, let's take it down. And I totally agree with what she said now, but it was like, I wanted it to be like this happy road that we were following. And then this wall, this sad
realism
wall we have. Yeah. And
yes,
for kids to question that, for kids to ask, well, why? And I'm like, well, let's talk about it,
Exactly.
Well, and I think
children's books are like that. Yeah. I'm sorry, Claudia. Children's books are like that. Yes, they're the better ones. Even the happy ones are meant to teach a little. I mean, that's our role. That's our role. This is the next generation. We're not going to be here forever. And they need to come up in the world, and we need to make them thinking and thoughtful individuals. Yes, we entertain them with our books, and they love, especially the little ones, they love all the lovely illustrations. But if there's a little something in there that they can take away after reading the book, then it makes the book even more worthwhile. And certainly the books that I have here that are yours, they're all worthwhile. So, okay, Claudia, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that kids are very smart, very intelligent, and speaking to them the truth, the things as they are, I think it honors that intelligence, and you done beautifully with what you did with the book, with your books.
Well, thank you.
So I think that is important as we authors and illustrators and so forth do our craft, that we remember that these kids are smart and they can handle it. Just be truthful. But I don't want to get too much involved into that. That was just my 2 cents.
No, absolutely. It's a good point, Claudia. Very good point. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. Bilingual books are becoming more available, but you've noticed that there's still a long way to go. You noted that. What do you think still needs to change in publishing to better support bilingual and bicultural stories?
Yeah, as far as in publishing goes, I think we just need more authors writing, I mean, writing these books. I think we need, for so long, it was one type of voice in the industry and for a very, very long time. And then like about 20 years ago, it slowly started to change. And it's still not, there's no equity right now still. It's still very one-sided, but I feel like we need to keep on producing these books, sharing our language, sharing our culture, and like exposing children to all of these different stories, worldwide stories that are out there. And so, and honestly, I think people need to be requesting these books from the library. They need to be ordering these books. They need to be buying these books. And we can talk like, well, people might not have money. You're right. So request those books. Say, these are the books that I've read about or that I saw online. I would like the library to hold them and have more of that circulation. From a personal aspect, I feel like we need parents to be reading more books to kids at home. As a teacher, I feel like it's I've seen it in the last few years. It's very much like, oh, iPad, do this. The iPad will take care of you. The iPad will do this. The store. And I think we need more reading. I'm finding a lot of students in my classroom, the fluency is going down, both English and Spanish. And like when we talk about my students, I'm like, I don't care what you read. I want you to read. And so I don't want you to lose your culture. I need you reading books in your language, in English, whatever you want to read it into. And like, especially with the bilingual kids in my classroom, I'm like, you guys understand? If you're a bilingual teacher, you can make an extra $7,000 with the bilingual stipend. And they're like, what? I'm like, yes, there is value to what we need language, and we've lost a lot of these languages. We need people like putting that time and that effort in. And that means just reading, 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 reading. So I think publishers should be producing as many of these books. Authors should be putting their own authentic voices out there and trying to make sure, like, especially if you want to hit as a bigger audience, then make it a bilingual book. I mean, it's really hard, especially if you don't speak both languages. But like, I love the Littlest Grito, right? But it's not out in Spanish. And I'm like, it should be out in Spanish. I think they should. But so my Tell Me Pueblo is covered in both English and Spanish. So I'm not waiting for it to be, for the numbers to hit high enough to be in Spanish. The Littlest Grito, I'm proud that I slid in a lot of Spanish in there and as well. And so, but I wish there'd be more. And so those are kind of, I'm going all over the place with my answer, but that's kind of what I think. And we're going to want to see more of these books. We need more authors writing them, more publishers publishing them, and more kids reading.
Yes, I've been very happy to see lately a little bit of a trend in agencies in which they will have one agent that kind of specializes in bilingual or bicultural books, and does not necessarily have to be Hispanic. We have wonderful people who write in Portuguese, or who write a different language. But I've noticed some agencies have begun to bring on board agents that are specifically looking at books from bilingual authors, as well as publishers. I have noticed if you look at the publishers and you look at their list of editors, you will see a couple of them that are, they have a name that identifies them with a different culture. And I think that's important. I think it's a trend that they're catching on to. And in this climate, especially in this climate, that is particularly important. So there's a lot of authors who write bilingual books, but they weren't being bought. They weren't being acquired. And I think now we're beginning to see that they are being acquired a little bit more, especially if the authors need to also know who to send their manuscripts to and who to direct their documents to, because that person in particular would be interested in it. So thank you, Nicolas. That's a wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. I'm going to pass it over to Alicia.
Yes. Okay. So your books emphasize kindness, acceptance, and courage. Why are these themes so central to your writing, and how do you hope they impact young readers?
So I write these books primarily from, and I talked about this before, from experiences in my own life. And then as a teacher of 25 years, about to start 26 in a couple of months, I want books that I can use in the classroom. So classroom books that are going to help me build that community that I want. So, we talked earlier at the beginning of the interview about, being a shy kid. And I was a very shy kid, and I hid in writing, I hid in books. And I didn't come out of my shell until middle school. And it was, I just moved to a new school in the middle of the grade, middle of seventh grade, and middle school is a very hard time to move. Middle schoolers are not known to be the nicest kids or most open to new people, especially to be in the middle of the year, not even the beginning of the year. And so I was miserable. I had a horrible time, and I complained every day. And I said I was going to go live with my dad. And I was living with my mom. And my stepdad was like, "Don't argue anymore. Give it one more year, and then you can go to high school." I was like, "Fine." And so in eighth grade, I went to class, and there was a kid named Dylan, and actually I found out he was a really popular kid. He didn't need to be nice, but he was just a nice guy. And I sat down, and he's like, "Hey," and that was it. And I was like, "Hi." And then the next day, he's like, "Hey, Nick," and then we talked a little bit more. And then I started making friends with his friends, and his friends were popular kids too. And I got started coming out of my shell. And I talk about this with my students because it's literally one of the books I read on the very first day. I wrote The Color Collector, and it's about a little girl who's very shy and very quiet. And another student notices that she collects bits of color. And at one point, he just comes out of his shell and he says, like, "Well, why do you do it?" And she's like, "Do you want to know?" And that's the mystery of the story that goes on. But that they become friends, and because they become friends, you see her world open up. It's very interesting. I don't know if you can show the very first page or so of that. But The Color Collector, when I wrote it, I didn't have this idea. The illustrator, Renea Metanu, did. She did it all in black and white. And I was like, except for a little bit of color. And I was like, why? And as you read, and then you see that their friendship becomes something bigger, more and more color gets added in. And I thought that was genius. And we talk, from an author's perspective, we talk about how illustrators bring their own ideas in and bring their own, just amazingness. I don't even know what the word to say, but it's just fantastic. I never would have thought about that. And that's one of the biggest speaking points. And that's one of the metaphors I talk about with students. Why do you think this? And so it opened this whole thing up. And so back to what I was saying, Dylan was that for me. And because of that, I came out of my shell. I made my own friends. I didn't move with my dad. I stayed in South Austin. I talked to kids about, like, ultimately I stayed with my friends. We went to college together. Then I lived in South Austin. I taught in South Austin. I met my wife in South Austin. I had my kids in South Austin. And I talked to these children about, like, you're told constantly what to do by your parents, your teachers, all this stuff, but you have power and you don't realize it. You can make somebody's day completely horrible, or you can make their day amazing. And sometimes you can change their entire life. If it hadn't been for Dylan, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have my wife. I wouldn't have my kids. Like, it's just this really interesting. A kid said hello. And so if you look at the front of the book, it's like, to Dylan for reaching out to a shy kid. 25, 30 years later, I had to dedicate that book to him because he really did change my life. And so that's one of the stories I write about with that. With My Time with Pueblo, we talked about it. I wanted kids to not be afraid of kids who look different, that we all we all have a lot of things in common, and we need to celebrate those things and be respectful of each other. And the Littlest Grito is, I want you to find your voice. And when you do find your voice, I want you to use it to help others. And those are those themes that I want to, for my own kids at home, but also for my own students. That's the type of classroom I want to have, because I want a classroom that's supportive and loving. I want a classroom that, makes sure we get stuff done, but we also are building each other up along the way. And so I write books for that lonely kid in his room when I was 8 years old, to the kids in my own classroom who might not feel secure or loved anywhere else other than my classroom. So that's why I want them to know that that's a safe place.
I just have a couple, just something little to add. One, it's more of a question. Does Dylan know that you dedicated this book to him?
Yeah, when the book was coming out, I got, because we had been Facebook friends, but we hadn't seen each other since, I think, high school thing was the last time we saw each other, because we went to different high schools too. And I wrote to him. I was like, "Hey, I need your address," and I wrote this really long letter, and I sent him a copy of the book. And he was really sweet. He wrote back, and he said he was struggling with some things going on in his life, especially as far as, like, what masculinity looked like and what kindness looked like. And he just said that it really hit at a really perfect time. And that made everything even better, because I felt like he helped me so much. And if this helped him in any way, what he was dealing with, but I was really open and honest. I'm honest to a fault. Like, I can't lie. It's really bad. Like, I stutter. Everybody knows what I'm like, so I can't ever lie. So I was just like, "Hey, these are my feelings. This is how you changed my life. And I just wanted to say thank you." It's so, and your name is going to be in every single one of these books. And so, yeah, he was very appreciative, very happy. And I love him. He lives in Colorado now. I need to go out there at some point and just see him and say hi. But yeah, we're
If
still
you do
Facebook
that,
friends.
take the book with you and get a picture of you two holding it
I
together.
will. That's a great idea. I should do that.
I love this story, a beautiful story. And the other thing I was gonna say is that spreading kindness costs nothing. So all of us have it in us to become somebody else's Dylan.
It's true. It is true. And that's what I try to tell these kids. These kids, like first graders, second graders, third grade, all the way to fifth, sixth, seventh, you can literally change someone's whole life. And it's just about how you hold yourself in the world and how you either pick people up or put people down.
Exactly.
All right, so the next question. You touched on this topic a little bit, but this question is a little bit more in depth. As a teacher, how do you see the impact of bilingual books in the classroom? Have you had any special moments where you saw firsthand how a book like My Town, Mi Pueblo or The Littlest Grito resonated with students?
Yeah, so speaking in general, just in general, I think picture books are a great way to quickly bring in these themes of behavior, of community, of friendship, of kindness. They're also a great way to bring in anything as far as um, if I'm teaching about, World War II, finding a picture book on World War II. We're talking about 9/11, I think it's Tree of Remembrance is one I use. There's a different name, but like it's a great, fast, easy way to introduce topics within the classroom. As far as bilingual books, especially next year, I'm going to be moving to fifth grade, and I'm going to be getting a lot of bilingual students that are higher in English, and letting them understand that, hey, this is a place you are loved, you're accepted. This is a place where you're respected, your language is respected. I mean, the look on a kid's face when they're struggling with English, but then you read Spanish and they're like, "Oh, I know those words." Like that connection is amazing. When I do author visits and kids raise their hands and they're like, "I speak Spanish and I can read this." And like I said, like I'm not that fluent, and so I get really tongue tied. And so a lot of times when I do author visits, I'm about to do one on Thursday in Ohio with My Town, My Pueblo. I ask for kids to come up and read the Spanish portion for me. And I've had it where whole classes come and every kid does one page. So I'll do the English and they'll do the Spanish. And the look of love and respect of like, oh, I'm with the author, or I know more than the author, because I'll tell them that. I'm like, y'all are smarter than me. And you need to, and they're like, and so there's this really big, like, it's this visual impact you see on these kids' faces when their language and their culture is respected. And I think teachers can easily do that by bringing bilingual books in. And I just love doing it when I'm like, hey, I really need help. Can you help me with this? They're like, yeah, we'll help you. And they do that part. And the end, all the kids clap for them, and it's super exciting and happy.
Okay, so this is a little bit similar question. You've mentioned that books should help build a classroom community. Can you share some ways teachers can use The Little Escrito or My Town, Mi Pueblo to spark discussions and bring students together?
Well, one of the things I do with My Town, My Pueblo is when I do a classroom presentation, there's a part at the end where I'll show different borders. And so I'll show a border, the Mexico Texas border, and it's giant fences and gates with razor sharp wire. And then I'll show a border of Canada and America, and it's a piece of tape through a library that says USA and Canada. I'll show like a picture of Argentina, and I can't remember what but it's just a river just split them. Netherlands and Denmark, I believe. I got to look at the picture again, but it's just a sidewalk etching, like the restaurant. You're sitting in Netherlands over here, but over here is the next country. There's another one where it's a triangle table, and you can sit at the table in three different countries. And so when I talk about those kids, I talk about like, why do you think these borders look different than these borders? And so we have these discussions, and depending on their age, you can kind of go deep and you can kind of go dark, or you can be like, oh, look how fun this is. Like you really just play how you want. But I think that's how I use My Town, My Pueblo. It's this idea of like, why do you think I wrote it in two languages? Why do you think they're saying the same thing? Why? And you just really ask these questions and you see what the kids are saying. You see what the kids how the kids are buying into it. Why did this book seem so happy? And then we have this page right here with these dogs. Why do you think we need dogs? Why do you think? And like having those discussions and not necessarily telling them my beliefs or what I'm feeling, but I want to know what they're feeling or where they're coming from. Because, as a teacher, I have my own political beliefs. I have my own, but I need them. I don't ever want to cloud their judgment or what they're doing. I want to see what they can come up with. So I never talk about politics. I never talk about who I voted for. I never talk about any of that. But what I do is uh, I bring in books that teach kindness. I read in books that teach empathy. And if that makes me one side of the political spectrum, I don't think that's about politics. I think that's about humanity. And so my job is not to influence who they vote for. My job is to influence what type of people they become. And that's why I share a lot of these books. With the Littlest Grito, that's a great book because, you know, she at first believes she can do it, and then an adult says, no, you can't, because you're a child and you're a girl. And so I talk about ageism and I talk about sexism and I talk about that with the kids. And they're like, what, and I say it in different ways, but it's like, who's the bad guy? The mayor. Why doesn't he not believe? Because she's a kid and she's a girl. Ladies, do we like that? No. Like we'll just have these big loud chants in the classroom. And and then it shows a kid not being solved by adults, a kid having to face this challenge and have to have a growth mindset over and over again and really practicing and trying to get better and ultimately being able to find their voice. And so those are things I bring in the classroom, and I think that really helps with what I want. I don't want them to quit. I don't want them. I'm constantly wrong in the classroom, and I want them to tell an adult, hey, you're wrong. The answer's not here. The answer's on page 3. Argue with me. I tell them, lawyer up. What do you got? If you can back it up, let's do this. And so I want them to fight with me. I want them to argue. I mean, respectfully, of course, but I want them to argue, and I want them to have an opinion, but not just an opinion out there. I want them to back it up and be like, okay, if you can back it up, then it's no longer opinion. It's a fact. So let's do this. What do you got? And so that's the type of classroom I want. I want voices. I want people to be heard, and I want people not to be afraid. And so that's the type of books I try to do too.
I'm going to jump in here, Nicholas, because that was such an excellent point that you brought up. And I think it makes it very challenging. I think we may have a question later on that deals with this, but teachers, librarians are being faced right now in certain states. I mean, I'm in Miami, Florida, so there are certain states that have a lot of book banning more than others. And also curbing of certain topics that you can or cannot speak about in the classroom. So it makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult. I wish that the powers that be in administration would listen to what you've just said. It doesn't have to influence politics. It doesn't have anything to do with politics, but it just has to do with kindness and, bringing the best out in people and teaching children that that is the right way to go. But sometimes hands are tied, mouths are closed. And so that's very sad. But I'm certainly, this interview that we're having today, we are interviews, and this is for later. But the interviews that we're doing here with a lot of the authors, but we have, in your case, an author educator. And I think this interview is going to be very, very interesting and important for teachers and librarians to watch, because you've brought up a lot of points of what is happening in schools and what should happen in schools and in classrooms. And some of our authors are not educators, and they're still wonderful interviews, but this one has that particular extra touch. So as a former librarian, as an educator, I'm just in awe of listening to you, and I just wish I could have been a fly on the wall of your classroom, and I wish my kids and grandkids would be your students in your classroom, because that's wonderful what you're saying. Okay, I think Alicia you still have one more question, or is it, no, or we're going to Claudia.
Oh, okay. I don't think I can follow that as well. Those Sylvia's footsteps, I totally admire what you're saying here. And yes, if I could go back in time and also be in your classroom, you'll be my favorite teacher. So, but
Thank you.
my question is a little bit on a little bit different direction. What advice would you give to aspiring authors, especially those who want to write bilingual or culturally rich stories, but may not have the full fluency in both languages?
My thing is write the book, write every book, write over and over again, write as many books, just get it out there, get it on paper, get it down. That's the first thing. When I wrote, My Time with Pueblo, I wrote it all in English because that's what I'm comfortable in, and I wrote in English, but I had that mindset, I need this to be bilingual. So just get it out there. That's the first thing. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about the language. Don't worry. All that can be fixed and all that can be worked on if you have a good story. So the first thing is just get the book out there, edit the story, get it to where you need it to, share it with other people, and then begin working on the bilingual part aspect of it. Do as much as you can, then find others that can help you, find experts. It's this whole growth mindset mentality that I have in the classroom. It's like never give up and find people smarter than you. And I've made it through my entire life, not being the smartest person in the world, in the room, but finding the smartest people in the room. And there's always people that are going to be smarter than you. And there's always people that are going to be kind and smart and that are going to be willing to help you and want to be a part of this journey with you. And so that's my biggest thing. Don't be afraid. You just need to have the story out there. And if the story's good, and if you've done the work, you have a chance to get it out there. It's all, once again, it's also all subjective. It's finding the right editor, finding the right publishers, finding the right people that are agents that are looking for those voices and stuff. And so that comes later on. But I think a lot of people get stuck at that first step and then they never write the story. And I was guilty of that too. I was guilty of never writing a story or having a story. And then I got guilty of the second part. Was like, I think this is a pretty good story, but never sending it out and never finding agents or never finding. And so if you think about this whole long journey, then it becomes overwhelming. And so I just say, just write the story. As long as the story is on paper, you can always develop it and get it better. But I also say, find people of the other culture, of the other language that can read this too, because you want their input as well, not just on language, but on story too. Is this in the right direction? Is this saying, stuff that is culturally relevant? I was lucky because I did live this. I lived being on the border and growing up on the border during our holidays and our summers and stuff like that. So it was a place from my heart. But also, like I said, I struggled with this idea. Am I too much of this? Am I enough of this? And so having other voices come in and kind of giving you some guidance. And then also being smart enough to know when to take their advice and when not to take their advice, because ultimately it's your story as well.
Fabulous answer. Thank you. The takeaways, like the Nike, just do it, just write it. But also find
You
the
have
right
to.
people to help you along the way. I love that. Hence the
Exactly.
saying, it takes a village to write and publish picture books.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
starting with the hardest part, I think the first step into the void, the scary, scary void, is the first step, and after that,
It gets easier. Yeah.
it gets easier. Yeah.
Well, you
Yes.
crave it. Like I've been in a slump for a couple of years because I had kids. I had books that came out. So I always think, oh, I have time. Like I have time. And then I have kids. I have a 1 and a 5-year-old, and I'm like exhausted all the time. And so I had all these great ideas, but I just wasn't writing them. And so this summer I was like, I need to write stories.
Yes.
And so I've gotten 2 down. My wife was nice enough to be like, I'll take the kids today. You get to write. And so I wrote, and I had all these stories and I wrote them down. Are they great? No, they're not great, but they're on paper, they're down, and we can move past that. Like now I can edit with my friends and but you're right. Like and once you do, you find that the tap gets opened and you want to write more. And so I'm craving writing more now too. So.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and so this is heading different direction, but related. For librarians and teachers and parents that are looking to support bilingual books, what are some ways that they can advocate? I think you mentioned libraries, going to your public libraries, but can you think of some more where they can advocate for more diverse stories in their schools and in their communities?
Yeah. I mean, the things I talked about before are the most impactful, especially as far as like free. I think a lot of times we talk about like, as an author, I would love everybody to go out and buy all my books. I'd love to be a multimillionaire. But that's not always available, and that's not always going to happen. So I'm not going to be like, everybody go buy my book, because that's the only way you're going to do it. So my biggest thing is, if you go to your library and you say, and you request these, then they'll order more books. If you go to Barnes and Nobles and you do have the ability to buy and you request those, then they know that this section of their kids area needs to be a little bit bigger, a little bit more inclusive. The easiest thing to do is, once you've checked out these books, go and give your favorite authors reviews. Reviews make everything, whether it's on Goodreads or on Amazon. These are massive impacts that you can have. And the more, we see, like, agents, publishers, they go and they read these. They go and they look at these. They go to see what are people requesting this? Is there a market? I have another book coming out, and I think I sold that one because My Tell Me Pueblo was doing very well. The Littlest Grito, the Color Collector is with the same people as the Littlest Grito, but because the Color Collector did well, I was able to sell Littlest Grito. So all these things are impactful, because the more people are buying these, the more people are reading these, the more ability for me to get my stories out there and for other authors to get their stories out there. So it's really letting publishers know and librarians know that there's an audience wanting these, craving these, and needing them. And you just have to let your voice be heard. And there's ways to do that with using your money, but there's also ways to do that with just typing or doing simple requests. Wow.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Alicia. I think you have the last couple questions, Alicia.
Do you have any upcoming projects you'd like to share?
I do, but I can't. They haven't been. I'll generally talk about them, but I have two books coming out. I don't know exactly when, because we're still in the illustrator phase. I hope next year, but I still got to wait for the illustration to come back. But the final edits have been done on both of them. So one is a story about kind of finding out when to complain and when not to complain. And it's very interesting of, like, if you're just sad and angry all the time, nothing in your life is ever going to be happy. And so, but it's also okay to be sad about something. So you don't have to be happy all the time. So it's a book about kind of that. And I wish I could talk about it and tell you more. I'm so sorry. And the other one's a collection of poetry. Because I love poetry. That's when I first started writing when I was a kid. Those were some of the stories that were most impactful when I was a kid. And this is a poetry about like gross things that make kids giggle. And I can't wait for it to come out, because it's one of them ones I've been working on, and sadly making decades of children listen to and help me and tweak as years go on, because I would share these funny little poems with them and stuff like that. So I'm really excited for those to come out, but I'm not exactly sure when.
It's great.
And last question, where can listeners connect with you and find out more about your books and upcoming events?
The easiest thing is nicholassolis.com is my website. Teach Solis is my Instagram handle. So that's the easiest ways to kind of see what's going on as far as where I'm at. I usually try to post a week or two in advance and stuff. I'm a very yes person. So it basically, there it is. So yeah, if anybody ever asks me to do something, I say yes, and then I throw it on Instagram, so then people can figure out where I'm going to be and stuff. So, but yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, wonderful, Claudia. So we're going to go to our rapid fire questions.
Oh, great. Okay.
These are fun.
Okay.
Yes, so we've reached the end of our official interview. These are just questions that we ask every single guest, and you just answer whatever comes to your mind first. There's no wrong answers. So the very first rapid fire question is, what's one fact about you that even your biggest fans might not know?
Okay, so I would say the easiest one is, when I was a kid, I had my name up in Times Square. My friend Mike and I decided to go to New York, and he was at Notre Dame, and he roomed with the son of, like, L'Oreal or something, one of the big wigs. And when we came around to Times Square, they had put in giant lights on their personal sign, big New York welcome to two wild Texans, Mike Morales and Nick Solis. And so that was the most shocking, amazing, fantastic thing that had ever happened in my life. And I remember being like, this is the best thing that's ever going to happen. And I was 18. And so life has
Wow, that's
gotten
awesome.
better since then, but it was fantastic. And it just started me on this life of like always wanting to do interesting things and saying yes to every single thing and like just seeing what happens and where it goes. So that was kind of one of my
It's
best
big. It
experiences.
is big for an 18-year-old. It is
Yeah,
big.
it was
Most people
fun.
don't go through life and they never have their name up in Times Square, you know? So that's a big thing. I have the second question for you.
Okay, okay, I'm ready.
If others were to describe you in one, two, or three words, what would those be?
Uh, I want to say funny. I think my students find me funny. A little cringe is what they say sometimes, but funny. I would hope they would say kind. And I would probably say strict. Like I think about what my students would say, and I don't know if strict is necessarily the right word, but more like structured. Like, when I have my classroom, those are the three things I want them to think about. I want them to know, like, I want them to laugh, and I want them to have a good time. I want them to feel loved and that I'm kind. But I also want them to know that hey, we're here to work and we're going to get stuff done. And so, if you can follow, like my whole motto in my class is, if you're cool, I'm cool. And so the cooler they are, the more fun things we get to do, the more projects we get to do. And so that's kind of where that structure comes through. So that's kind of how it would look to see how I think they would describe me. And kids are honest. And so that's why I think about what are the three words they would describe me
Oh,
as.
yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. Alicia?
Last rapid fire question. What book or books have had the most impact in your life?
Oh, this is easy. So when I was a kid, like I said, like I tended to go into books. And so the bigger the books, the longer the books is what I usually grab. So the first books I ever really read that I really didn't understand what I was reading that much, but were anything by Mark Twain. Huckleberry Finn was like the one I went to, Tom Sawyer. Those are the ones I usually read to because they were big, I could hide behind. And so for some reason, like Mark Twain is still like this figure that's in my life and in my heart just because I read so much of his books when I was a kid. But it really wasn't until Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends, that my mind was blown. I wasn't reading to protect, I was reading for joy. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, I can tear through those books so easy. He was so funny. He was so clever. And like, that's what really struck me as like, oh, this might be the type of writer I want to be. And so we are talking about that collection of poetry. I'm pushing, and I think the publishers too, we're going to make it look very similar to Shel Silverstein, his drawings, what they're like, very simple, very stylized like that. And that's what I'm really hoping for in honor of him, because A Light in the Attic. Once I hit those books, it was just this thing that kind of changed the way I looked at books, and I started really loving stories and poetry. And so that was like the big impact change for me.
I think we can identify.
Yeah, I loved Huckleberry Finn
I
I
Mhm.
love
love
those
Tom
too. Yeah.
Sawyer.
when I was a kid.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you know what? Just in context, so that everybody, all our listeners know, especially our listeners who are authors, aspiring authors, Mark Twain was told not to quit his day job.
Oh, wow.
Okay. He was told, you're no good as a writer. Don't quit your day job because you'll never make it. And that goes to show you how wrong things can be, people can be. And, he just kept on going. And Shel Silverstein, I'm with you. Nicholas, I'm with you. And those are absolutely, I mean, you get kids rolling on the floor
Yeah.
with laughter with his books.
I love everything from Shel Silverstein.
It's wonderful. My favorite is The Missing Piece,
That's a great one.
because they always were like, oh, wait. It left them with a question, that they could interpret on their own what happened. And especially second grade, they catch it, they catch the wit. And that was I love his books, but that was my favorite of all his books.
I
My
have to say
favorite
that.
poet. Sorry, what were you
No,
gonna say?
Okay.
but oh, my favorite is I think it's called Masks. It's about speaking of voice. This is why I remembered because it's about uh, two kids who are different from everybody else. So they wear masks to be the same as everybody else, and they're perfect for each other, but they miss each other because they're wearing masks. And like that's my favorite poem by Shelso.
And
Great.
that's the
I
thing.
love
Like
it.
The
some of
wit.
this stuff. Mine is I think it's I'm sick, and it's just like she talked about all the ways she's sick and everything she's sick, and then it's like, well, wait, it's Saturday. Oh, I'm gonna go out and
Yeah,
play.
I'm
Oh, yeah, I
fine.
saw that. Yeah,
Such a be
that's
like
a really
you
good one.
just yeah, it's so. But
He
that's the
he
thing. Like
knew capture kids. You know, he knew what kids were thinking. It was
but it
just
it wasn't only funny. It was also there was
no
deep wit, there was
poignant.
wit, but there's point. Yeah, it was all these mixtures that he could tie into a simple poem, and it was
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, time just went by fast. I think this brings you to the very end of our time with you today, Nicholas. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and everything you've learned. And I have to give a shout out to your wife also for giving you the time and space to continue to write and produce amazing picture books. So.
Yes.
She's fantastic. Yeah, I owe everything to her. So even since I started the journey, she was always supportive. Like whatever you need to do, like I'd go to classes and stuff, and she's just amazing. Morgan, I love it.
Oh, fabulous. Well, this concludes our session for our listeners. You can find us at Bilingual Book Buddies on YouTube and everywhere. Actually, the main places where podcasts are available at. In the next episode, Nomar Perez.